So now that we have our data organized in a table and we've calculated mean, median, mode, standard deviation, variance, I'm going to take a look at individuals in the values in the table and see how, if there's any problems with what data we have. In other words, identifying perhaps errors or outliers that are going to affect the accuracy of our data. So I'm going to reorder the height from largest to smallest. And first off, this 40 and 125 for height and arm span just doesn't seem right. This is obviously an error. So what I'm going to do is take out this person's data. So I'm going to highlight those cells, and so we got the table row deleted, and you'll notice that some of our, if I undo that now, and we'll look at what happens to our standard deviation. So it was at 12.93, etc. And if I undo that, then you can just see that that one value changed our standard deviation by a fair bit, so almost more than 2. And so if I redo that, you can see what happens to our standard deviation. Also, if you take a look at the mean, mean is 158.5 about. So if I undo that, that one value dropped our mean considerably. All right, so now that I have data that looks a little bit better, what I'm going to do is create a normal curve. So I'm going to add a sheet here, and I want to know how many standard deviations above and below the mean these values are. So standard deviation of 4 above the mean, or 4 standard deviations above the mean, and I'm going to go 3.9, and I'm going to highlight so these represent number of standard deviations above and below the mean. And I'm going to put in here the value and probability. I'm going to transfer my mean that I just calculated from the previous table for height, and this is going to be the standard deviation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mean from the first sheet. So I'm going to say this is equals, and the mean here. So the mean for height and you'll notice it takes data collection. So there is, it's referencing the information from the previous sheet. And I'm going to find my standard deviation from the previous sheet as well. And the nice thing about this is if I redo any kind of calculations on the other sheet, it will automatically alter this value because they're linked together. I don't have to recopy and paste. So now I'm going to calculate the value that is 4 standard deviations above the mean. Just so that it makes it easier for our So now for my value, I'm going to put in equals, and it'll be 4 times, so 4 standard, we're calculating what's 4 standard deviations above the mean. So I want to change this to a global reference. So clicked on the mean. And there, 4 standard deviations above the mean is 210. And we scroll down, 4 standard deviations below the mean would be 106. So if you recall from normal curves, we expect most of our data to be within 3 standard deviations of the mean. So now we're going to create, we're going to figure out what the probability in this situation is for each of these values. So we're going to put in equals norm dist. And we're going to choose our value, our mean, and we want that to be a global reference. We want our standard deviation, which is in cell I1, and again, I want that to be a global reference. And I'm going to put in for cumulative, I'm going to put in false because I want to know what each value is. And close the bracket. And now it fills in, and so the probability of being 4 standard deviations above the mean is 1.03 to the times 10 to the negative 5, so a very low probability. And you can see that as you get closer down here, the probability of actually being at the mean will be 0 standard deviations above the mean, so that works out to be about 3% probability of being, and the value is, go back to that here, right there, so 0.03. This is 0 standard deviations above the mean, which means it is, or below the mean, which means that is the mean value of 158.46 whatever, and that's the same one as up here. And so you have a 3% probability of being exactly that height. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a chart. So I go to Insert, Scatter, and we're going to choose the smooth. So this gives us a better view of how our data is distributed, if this indeed is a normal curve. And I'm going to format the axes here because and there we get a better view of how our data is distributed. So here is the height. So here at about the mean, which is approximately 158, sorry. This would show how you expect the heights to be distributed. So we would expect very few people to be around 120 to 130 centimeters tall, and very few people above about 190. And so if we go back to our data table and notice that we've got very few people down here. And so this gives us a very good feel as to how our data is distributed. And again, there's very few people that are above 185 to 195.